Hello, everyone, and welcome to Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. It's Tuesday, so we're one day closer to the weekend. So I hope everyone's having a great start to the week. Super Bowl week this week, so that's exciting. Should be a really good game this weekend. We will talk a little bit about that a little bit later on, but definitely should be a fun game. I hope everyone's excited for that as well. So yeah, I'm pleased to bring you another episode. I'm excited to talk some football. I am pleased to introduce my guest that I have with me for this episode, Patriots beat writer at the Boston Herald, Andrew Callahan. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Gabby.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate you joining me. I am definitely really excited to talk with you. There's been a lot going on lately in football world, the Patriots world. So I'm excited to hear some of your thoughts on that. But before we kind of get into that, can you just kind of talk a little bit about, your journey and how you got into working in sports?
Sure. So I graduated from UConn in 2013. I grew up actually just right outside of campus, down in
Me
Stuart,
too.
Connecticut.
Me
Yeah.
too, actually. Yeah,
No,
I
no
grew up
kidding.
really close to UConn in Holland.
Oh, how about that? Yeah, literally right next door. Yeah. So I went to U. S. Smith, which now is
Oh,
probably something
nice.
only you know what that means, but basically the high school on campus. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do because I had done a lot of sports radio, and sports writing in college, but left with a degree in psychology. So because I didn't have an internship, I basically had an internship of living with my parents after college for a few months of my jobs, wrote for free, and then eventually got a job covering high school sports. So I did that for 9 months in 2014. Left to go to Pennsylvania for a job that was a little bit of a step up, same deal, some high school, a little bit of D3 college, and did Penn State football part time. It's kind of something I took upon myself. So that, luckily enough, landed me a job in 2016 covering Penn State full time. Reached out for some interest from CBSSports.com, and at 24/7 Sports, they do all the recruiting. And so I was there for 2 years. And then a friend of mine who was covering the Patriots at the time said, "Hey, I'm leaving Mass Live." Kevin Duffy, who oddly enough then went to the Herald. So I interviewed, and it was actually my second interview with them because they had an opening for their Red Sox and Celtics writers, but they ended up filling those instead of adding a third football person. So 2 months later, Kevin left. Then I interviewed again, got the job, and he left the Herald in September 2019. And then I interviewed again for the job, and here I am.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty cool process. And what's kind of your favorite part about your job?
Oh, just the idea of waking up and not knowing what the hell is going to happen that day, I think, which is maybe more Patriot specific than just the NFL. But no, it's exciting. And I think it's, a combination of you want to chase the stories and figure out what's going on as much as, you digging them up ahead of time. Like this is not all reactionary. I think, that's where inevitably you start if you're writing for a blog or you have your own site. But I think, the deeper reporting part is where you get to unearth things and then share them with everybody else. So I think, when you have a well-reported story, that's the best. That's the height of this business, and typically when you do your best writing too. So I think that's probably it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the cool thing about working in sports because there's so much that happens and you really just never know what's going to happen. So no day is really the same because there's just so many different things going on.
Yeah, when I hang out on the road, which I did only a little bit this year, obviously none in 2020 with other Patriots writers. I mean, we'll sometimes play a game of just, hey, where were you when, and then name the scandal or some news breaking, and inevitably you're at the gym or maybe at a wedding or just all this crazy stuff for a first date, and you just have to say, I am so sorry, I need to go. So yeah, it always keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, for sure. And that's super fun. And that's why, and I feel like it's so rewarding being able to work in sports and covering a team that you love really also, because that's another cool thing about it as well.
Yeah, and it was funny. I kind of fell out of touch with the NFL covering college for 3 years there, one part time and then two full time, just because I would do these comprehensive film breakdowns, which is how I got in the door covering Penn State. But then I spent all my Sundays reviewing the film, writing it up, and doing the same on Monday, one day for offense, the other for defense. So, of course, I watched the Super Bowl, I caught the playoffs, but in terms of the regular season, like it was learning the Patriots almost all over again from, I grew up a big NFL fan, knew about the Patriots, but in that 3 year hiatus of really watching the NFL every Sunday was, in a way, kind of a new perspective, right? Like obviously I didn't forget Bill Belichick or Tom Brady, but you don't know everyone on the practice squad at that point. So it was good to have that fresh outlook when I came back and to look at the team, like a reporter.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And obviously the Patriots over, the years have been pretty fun to cover, especially with, all the success that they had during that 20-year run with Brady and Belichick. So, anyone who was covering the team during any of that period, it was just fun, you know.
Yeah, definitely. My first season was a Super Bowl year, so there are zero complaints. You couldn't have asked for more that year. Not only just that game, of course, but the AFC Championship game in Kansas City, which you listen to players like Devin McCourty, right? He's been around since 2010, and he's asked what were your favorite Super Bowls, your best wins, your best memories, and he puts that up there, even ahead of certain Super Bowls, including the one against the Falcons. So it was just moment after moment, storyline after storyline. It didn't end with the Super Bowl, of course, because we had some news break about a month later, which was one of those moments. Hey, where were you when there was this press conference in Florida following Robert Kraft? So, but yeah, anyway, it's been a lot of fun, and that year was unforgettable.
That AFC Championship game was crazy too. I mean, that was so nerve-wracking to watch.
Yeah, I bet it's funny in Kansas City. The press box is probably the highest one. Tied with maybe Indianapolis. So everything looks like these tiny little dots, like you might imagine. The original like Madden football game where you're just kind of moving them slowly, and it's almost like Tecmo Bowl. So, but you could still feel the energy despite that, because you're on top of the crowd and they're screaming and yelling and just it's also condensed and focused on those little dots and what means so much on third down after third down in overtime, or the Chiefs come back and the Patriots answer and it ends. So it was just, as much as you probably had a better view at home, honestly, of that game, just being there again, something you never forget.
Yeah, for sure. Just being able to experience that atmosphere of being there for a game like that. And especially with, what the Chiefs have done since then too, and kind of looking back on that game and then realizing kind of like how much success in the last few years the Chiefs have seen too. Like the atmosphere must have been just so cool to be there.
Yeah, it was. And that was, a game that had they won, it was widely going to be documented as kind of the passing of the torch, right? Because the
Yeah.
Chiefs the very next year go on to win the Super Bowl. But at
Mhm.
least that was the Patriots' last stand. The phrase that season was, we're still here, not gone. It was their sixth title. And, Brady's too old. And they manufactured a lot of the motivation that people thought they sucked. No one thought they sucked or they weren't that good. But, that's something they do. And, being able to hold off the Chiefs, which I think for my money, that 2018 offense was probably the best of the last 5 years in the NFL, maybe four, certainly since that season. So for them to have that game plan that holds them to, I think, 7 points, going into the fourth quarter, and then Brady does what he does in the fourth quarter in overtime, it was really special.
Yeah, for sure. And we hope that in the future we get to feel some of that success again, but it really was just looking back at that Super Bowl was just symbolic of like, yeah, we're still the Patriots and Tom Brady's still Tom Brady, and that was just such a special year for that reason. And obviously so much has changed since then, including, the one of the biggest things going on in football right now, which is that Tom Brady actually really officially retired. And that's crazy to me, because I think obviously we all knew it was going to be coming eventually. It had to happen one day. I mean, he wasn't going to play forever, but I was one of those people that was holding out hope that he had one more year left
Mm-hmm.
and that he was going to come back for one more year. But at the end of the day, making that decision makes sense. He wants to be with his family now. And the guy, I mean, if he was going to go out, that was such a Tom Brady way of going out, facilitating another comeback that although that comeback fell short, it was still kind of telling people, okay, like I'm still Tom Brady. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, he went out on his own terms, right? And so often in sports, you don't get the ending that you want. Either you have to cut it short, which some could argue that he did, at least from the standpoint of he could still play next season and be a top 10, top 12, whatever quarterback. But, most often you're nudged out the door, kind of like he was in New England, because they thought, look, we'd rather cut bait a year too early than too late. And, he wanted to leave at the same time. So it was mutual in that sense. But yeah, it was, good for him. I was surprised, honestly, too. People had been asking me. I was like, look, I could see either way, because he's long said, I'm not going to quit when I suck. I'm going to get out ahead of time. But next year was 45. We know he's been talking about that for upwards of a decade. And that team was still pretty good. They would have had some major decisions this offseason. But I think, his next ventures, as Seth Wickersham from ESPN documented, are now starting to feel almost as fulfilling as what he would do with football. So it's not, not that same competitive drive or that just euphoria you only find on Sundays, but it's his family, which obviously is always going to be fulfilling, his brand, TB12 Sports, everything else going on. He can, keep himself busy for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And some people were talking about how cool it would be if he came back to coach, which could be interesting.
Yeah, I can promise you that's not gonna happen. He
I
was
don't
that
think
sad
that would happen, but
early on his
I think
career.
he's
Yeah,
pretty.
yeah,
I
but
think he's
people can
pretty set
definitely
on that.
dream.
Yeah, I think he's pretty set on that. But yeah, people joked like maybe he'll come and be the Patriots offensive coordinator now that they need one.
Yeah, I can tell you that's not gonna happen, but it's
No, I don't think
if
so.
you want to dress them up or anyone wants to Photoshop or make some memes, now's your time because they don't have one yet.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. This is the opportunity to do that before they hire an offensive coordinator, and then all that gets shut out the window.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was definitely an emotional day, I think, for a lot of people, Patriots fans especially, but even other football fans just around just people just around the NFL, like who grew up watching Tom Brady, like especially even people from my generation. I mean, that's a lot of what we even know was Tom Brady. So it's definitely the game isn't going to be the same without him. But at the end of the day, people know what he did, people know his legacy. So at the end of the day, he's still Tom Brady and everyone knows that, regardless. So, I mean, what he was still doing at 44 is just impressive. So people can kind of look back on that and remember, he was still Tom Brady and still doing Tom Brady things up until his very last game of his career.
Yeah, of course. That comeback 27-3 against the Rams, and then the defensive bust breaks it open. So he kind of, as they would say in New England, did his job. But yeah, he became as much an institution of the NFL and as any franchise really, save for those that were maybe the Packers and the Steelers and others at the beginning, because he's older than the Houston Texans. All right, he has more Super Bowl wins than any franchise, and several of them, including the Texans, combined. So he transcended the NFL. He transcended sports. He's an American icon. And it takes a special set of circumstances, not only just landing with Bill Belichick, but, how they performed in those games and Adam and Terry's kicks. But, his will and his performance under pressure was special. And that sustained him. And, I think it gets underrated how good of an athlete he was. Like, let's remember this guy was drafted into the NFL and by the MLB. But what he did after that was a lot of his own making. And that's kind of what we got to celebrate twice, unofficially and then officially when he retired.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I know that was also crazy too. It was 2 days really of all of these emotions because it was first when that news was reported, and then again when Tom Brady actually officially announced it himself. So I was having the same feeling twice in the span of 1 week because it was just definitely so many emotions that came with that. But yeah, I mean, everyone should definitely feel grateful to have been able to experience somebody like that because we're not going to see that again. So that was just he's just really special and what he was able to accomplish in his career, you know, people definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, we might have another quarterback 20, 30 years from now who could rival him in terms of ability. I mean, you probably have some right now, Patrick Mahomes, for example. And this isn't to say, he's the greatest quarterback ever or will be, because Brady's, trademark is going to be the 7 Super Bowls, much like Michael Jordan, has his 6 rings. And you go back to Bill Russell, obviously had a lot more when the NBA was much smaller, but, few players are going to ever match that, I think, in the NBA in a similar way you could see maybe for a quarterback moving forward, because the league's going to expand. It's much more difficult now than it was, at least when Brady started, to win those. And it just takes, again, a special set of circumstances. But yeah, no one's going to replicate what Tom Brady was, represented, and accomplished. They're only going to build upon that. So maybe, could you have a Patrick Mahomes, what he'll do without Brady and what he started? Who knows? But, the greatness that he has will always be unique.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, this set of young quarterbacks now that are kind of the future of the NFL are really fun to watch too. I mean, Josh Allen is another one that's really that he's really good. Obviously Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. I think all these guys are going to be fun to watch as they continue to develop now that they're kind of the future of the league now.
Definitely. And you think back about Brady, I mean, he was put in the supposed golden age quarterbacks, right? Because it was him, Peyton Manning, Ben Roethlisberger comes out, wins the Super Bowl in his second season after going to the AFC Championship game as a rookie. Phillip Rivers in that same class with Roethlisberger. And so was Eli Manning, who won 2 Super Bowls. So, those guys started to fade off, and you're wondering, where is this next crop of quarterbacks coming up? And bang, they're here. You mentioned Herbert, Josh Allen, all these guys are even just in the AFC alone, right? Lamar Jackson, we haven't touched upon. So there are so many good quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, that are coming up. And I think it speaks to just the development off the field in terms of the knowledge and the sports science, some of which is the longevity, the Brady stuff, but also just the understanding that if you can kind of extend plays, I think there's a little bit more value in that now, right? Because there's no defense for something you can't predict and what this quarterback is going to spin or turn or do off platform. And now that these guys are able to practice some of those, extended plays, it makes them all more dangerous because they almost get a second chance within a play. If the first play is defended, you still have a shot if you can get outside the pocket and make a throw off 1 foot and throw it long, and that's what they're doing. So I think this is truly going to be the golden age of quarterbacks and could only get better from here, at least for the next 3-5 years.
Yeah, it's going to be so exciting to see them all, and that's why I think the league is in good hands now with these young guys, and that's why it's going to be really fun going forward to kind of see what they all do. But speaking of young quarterbacks, I mean, Mac Jones and the Patriots this year, how do you feel about the season that they had? Because I think they definitely surpassed expectations by being a playoff team. Because overall, before this season started, I don't think people were really looking at this Patriots team as a team that was going to make the playoffs. And so I'm pretty impressed as to what they did this year with, a rookie quarterback, some transitional changes within the team, bringing some new players in this year, in the off season. So I think what they did this year overall was definitely surprising. And I'm really happy to see it overall, what they did this year.
Yeah, it's interesting too, right? Because the end of the season, losing 4 or 5 and then giving up the best offensive performance ever in the wild card round leaves a sour taste in your mouth. But you're right. I mean, this was, before the season, it was a legitimate topic of debate. Will the Patriots make the playoffs or won't they? And I think part of that factored in that, more teams are making the playoffs now than ever before in the NFL, but they were also regarded as the best or certainly top 5 team for much of the middle of the season. I think that counts. So overall, I think they probably met the upper end of expectations. But Mac Jones certainly exceeded them, right? He was going to be the rookie of the year if it wasn't for this historic Jamar Chase season. We saw what that did for the Bengals, obviously them playing in the Super Bowl, but he was good from the get-go, and the offense played to his strengths, and he fulfilled what they were kind of missing last year with Cam Newton in terms of just, short to intermediate accuracy, full command of the system. And, again, Newton got the short end of the stick, but he came around for a second season and got beat out. So Mac Jones exceeded expectations. I think 10 wins, Patriots fans would have taken that at the beginning of the year. You just felt like you probably had a little bit more, though, when you're 9-4 and then finished down at 10-8. So I think there's still a gap there with Buffalo. But, as far as when you just look at the standings and how things went in the playoffs, that was about, a good season as you would have expected back in August or September.
Yeah, and with Mac Jones, I mean, he's going to continue to improve too, and I think he's in a really good system for him to be in. And it's, the Patriot system is really hard to learn, and the fact that he was able to pick up on it so quickly was something that I was really impressed by with him too. And like you said, I mean, his accuracy and his football IQ, I really like too, and just being aware of what's going on around him on the field, which I think is a big thing too. So there's definitely things about Mac Jones that I really like, and he's going to continue to get better. And, people had high expectations for him this year with, because the Patriots have been pretty spoiled with quarterbacks overall. And so, I think people expected a lot out of him, but they also at the same time had to remember he was a rookie. And so, like there were things that he was going to do that are make rookie mistakes and, things he has to adapt to still. But I definitely think he's a good quarterback for the Patriots to have, and his attitude and his leadership, and I think I think the Patriots are in good hands with him.
Yeah, I would say so too. And I think you're right. In the middle of the season, I remember doing TV one night before they played the Falcons, and there was a question in the segment we were doing about, who's a better quarterback on the field between him and Matt Ryan. And if that was a question you knew was going to be asked in November during the preseason, you're like, holy smokes, like, yeah, I'll take that, 7 times a week. But it was just a matter of, again, managing expectations. And they played better defenses towards the end of the season, defenses that had more tape on them. And the Bills specifically, who they not only just lost to in the wild card round, but lost to in week 16, which are really like de facto AFC East championship game, is a defense the Patriots have struggled with ever since Sean McDermott got over there as head coach. So it wasn't just that Mac Jones struggled against them. It's that structurally the Patriots offense really can't, crack that Bills defense. And look, it's a good defense, but it was a little bit more of an uphill climb, and he, kind of faltered as well. But I think the thing that you take solace in, even during that tough stretch, is that, he makes a second half push in Indianapolis. They fall short. He makes a second half push against the Bills then in week 16, blowout win over the Jaguars. They brought him back to basics. Now it's, can you make that proverbial year 2 leap? I think the Joe Burrow comparisons are a little bit unfair. I think Burrow's a little bit better downfield. And he was, he's a little bit more athletic. But, again, that full season in the Patriots program now in the offseason, I think leaves a lot more room to grow. And if there's a guy who's going to maximize that talent, it would be Mac Jones.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'm looking forward to see what improvements he does make for his second year now that he's been exposed to a lot of things in year one. And, like you said, I still think there definitely is that gap between the Bills and the Patriots right now. But I think, they're going to continue to make improvements. And, it's going to be exciting to kind of see what they do in the offseason, too. I mean, what kind of, areas would you like to see them address in the offseason this year?
Yeah, and this kind of relates to Mac Jones. I think it's the obvious starting point, is just receiver. And I think
Yep.
they certainly made upgrades from 2020 to 2021. Kendrick Bourne was good. Nelson Aguilar had a down year, which was somewhat predictable when he's coming off this career season in Vegas after, 4 so years in Philadelphia. But I think you just need a receiver there who is at least widely regarded as a number 2 or a number 1 across the league, which all that means is just that if you put him on most rosters, he's regarded as either the best receiver or the second best guy, because then that puts the rest of the Patriots depth chart, in my mind, in proper order. Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers fight it out for that second or third spot, and Nelson Aguilar stay in that mix. So it's just, you want to alleviate some pressure and also help elevate Mac Jones, because we saw what Jamar Chase did for Joe Burrow this season. You saw what happened when Matthew Stafford, not only just got to a much better team in Los Angeles, but the weapons he was afforded. Cooper Kupp, Offensive Player of the Year, most likely. Odell Beckham acquired midseason. Robert Woods there for a good stretch. So you need weapons around him, and I think that's just a way to elevate not only him as a quarterback, but the rest of the offense when teams are starting to stack the box against that run game, which I just don't think is the way you need to win in 2022 as the feature of your offense. It's a good way to kind of provide a change up week to week when all these offenses are spread. They're running 3 receivers, it's in the gun, and the Patriots are under center. It's a good change up to have, like the Ravens do, but you need to have a plan B. And the Patriots really didn't have that because they didn't have a true number 1 or 2 receiver on the outside.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely going to be the biggest priority. And, the more weapons that you can get for Mac Jones, the more, like you said, it's going to help elevate him and make everybody else around him good as better as well, too. And so I think I do think that is what they're going to prioritize. I think, and there's some free agents this year that they could go after too, and I think it's going to be exciting to kind of see who ends up there, because they made a big splash in free agency last year. I don't think it's going to be that to that extent this year, but I think I do think that they make some solid moves, and I do think that they prioritize receiver, which they've definitely been kind of trying to do. That's a position they've always been kind of having to address a little bit, and so I think that they know that that's kind of their biggest gap offensively right now. So if they can get like a true wide receiver 1 for Mac, I think that offense is just going to be significantly better.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because when I was preparing for that big splash, which was really what they did, like 10 cannonballs into free agency. It wasn't just dipping a toe in, but they spent in a way that was in line with how they had been spending in free agency since 2013, as far as my research had shown. Which they're not going to target a top tier wide receiver, at least in the free agent market, because they see that money spent, let's call it $20 million per year, is better spent on 2 guys who make or average around 10, and that's what you saw. Kendrick Bourne was under $10 million. Nelson Aguilar on average was about 11 or 12. So that's how they went about it. But to some degree, if you're spending for that second tier, that's either the production you're going to get on a good day, which you did from Bourne, but if you receive less return on that investment as you did with Aguilar, now you're really not getting your money's worth. So it is a little bit more of a risk going for the number 1. And I don't think they have the cap space to land some of the guys who are going to be potentially on the free agent market, like Nell Robinson in March. But it'll be interesting because they know, and I talk to people in the front office, that they need to kind of get creative with how they're going to restructure these deals to create more space, where they might not put it all into a receiver, but they've got to get someone who is at least a starting caliber. And then maybe you go to the draft. N'Keal Harry didn't work out. That's fine. You just got to keep swinging. And it's interesting, too. I brought up Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. There are a couple good Alabama receivers who, yes, they're injured, Jameis Williams and John Mechie, but they have experience with Mac Jones. And if and when they ever get to return to the field, that chemistry they built with Mac in college might help accelerate their development, where typically rookies struggle in New England. I think has to be a consideration for them in the first or second round.
Yeah, absolutely. And with N'Keal Harry, obviously that was disappointing because he was a great player to watch in college. But again, it's hard to know when you draft somebody if they're going to work out or not. It's just obviously people give Belichick a lot of crap for picking N'Keal Harry, but it's just hard to know. When you draft them, if they're going to work out in the NFL. And that situation, unfortunately, just didn't work out in the Patriots' favor. And it just is what it is. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you just go back to the drawing board and you keep trying until you find somebody who does work out, and whatever means that they do that, like you said, it does need to be somebody who is a starting caliber wide receiver that can be reliable all season, that, Mac Jones can really throw the ball to, because again, like that's definitely the biggest area that's lacking. But I mean, also, how concerned are you about the defense after the that playoff game? Because obviously the defense was pretty solid all season, but then, that performance against, actually both performances against the Bills when they played them in that second game in the regular season and then again in the postseason, do you think that is more of just, Josh Allen is just something else, or do you think that that's a concern for the Patriots?
No, I think it is a concern, and not to the degree that, look, you got to blow it up from scratch, because this was the number 2 defense in the league by points allowed, and they were top 5 by DVOA. So this was still a good defense. It's just a matter of, you got to understand who you're playing. And in your division, it's going to mean Josh Allen twice a year. So you also saw them struggle down in Miami against Tua Tagovailoa, who somehow is 3-0 versus Bill Belichick. But a lot of that was, the early down RPOs that they were using. So not to get too into the weeds on that, but I think it just speaks to, you need better speed at the second level, where you're looking at guys like Dante Hightower, Juwan Bentley, even Jamie Collins to a degree. And it's just harder to keep up in those short windows when it's either a run play, and if you commit, it's a slant behind you, and then you're playing catch up and you already don't have that speed to work against a slot receiver or, whoever it might be. And so the Patriots have solved some of those issues by dropping down, in years past, to Patrick Chung and now a Kyle Duggar into the box, or an Adrian Phillips, to mitigate, some of that lack of speed. But teams are getting around that. And I think you need to have just faster linebackers. And it's something that's been said in New England forever, and they've gotten by. But when you have Josh Allen escape in the pocket because the guy spying him is that much slower than him, and the edges can't contain, there's nothing you can do. So I think they need to find some specific answers, and they might be schematic to these early down RPOs. You're going to see a lot of from Miami continued, and Buffalo. And, Josh Allen, he showed that when he levels up, just like any elite quarterback, there's really no stopping him. The thing is, even when he does that, he shouldn't be going without a punt for 9+ quarters, which is what happened in those 2 games, and going back all the way to the first meeting. So yes, they have some issues. I think the last part about that is Matt Judon and J.C. Jackson played some of their worst games of the year in those last 2 meetings. And anytime you play an opponent, whether it's Bills or anybody else, and your 2 best players on defense don't show up, the whole defense is going to suffer. So whatever you need to do to get those guys, back in their A game, and Judon was dealing with some COVID, that's what you need to do. And maybe it means retaining J.C. Jackson. Maybe it means going somewhere else. But they've got issues to solve, and it touches all areas of the defense: personnel, coaching, and scheme.
Yep, absolutely. And I think this is obviously, like you said, this was a solid defense, and then we really saw a lot of those holes really down the stretch. And I think they know what they have to address, and I do think that they will address it. And it's just, it makes sense, like they weren't gonna be like a perfect polished team this year as it is. So I mean, like that's why we go back and we kind of see what can they do to improve next year, and you hope that they just continue to make improvements and kind of start to close that gap with Buffalo, who's only going to get better as well. I mean, Josh Allen he's just so good, and I think he has so much more potential too, and he's in a good system as well. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well. And yeah, for whatever reason with Miami, they always struggle there for whatever reason. So I think that that's something that definitely is something to look out for as well. But I think the division, I mean, Miami this year, they went on that crazy stretch of games, but overall, I think that they were, they're still a little bit further back. And then obviously the Jets are the Jets, but I think it's going to be the Patriots and the Bills, for a while. And so you hope that they can at least make some improvements that can start to close that gap. Maybe not necessarily jump ahead of Buffalo right away still, but you hope that they just continue to make those strides so that they can, continue to compete with them.
Definitely. And, if the Patriots take care of business in one of those games against Miami, they're, I think, either tied or ahead of Buffalo there in the standings, and then they get that game at home. It's not a guarantee that you would have, played the Bills even in the wild card round, because, of course, you flip the season opener, the whole season's going to go in a different way, right? Or even, at the end of the season, you were still behind Buffalo. But it just means, you need to get back to a team where you're taking your own business. You are not losing before you do things to win those games, because Buffalo is doing that. They don't take a lot of penalties. They play excellent defense. Their special teams are good. You got good quarterback play, and they don't commit a lot of turnovers. And we saw the Patriots had a lot of turnovers early in the season, and then they shut them out in the middle part of the year, and then they couldn't force any down the stretch. So, some of these are just obvious football truisms, but, it was not an obvious Patriot team last year. And I think that had to do with a lot of new faces, some of the rookies that were playing a big role. It'll be really interesting, too, because we've already heard from Mac Jones a couple times now, starting with his press conference after that playoff loss, saying, I'm really looking forward to this offseason to basically put my own imprint and take over this team and see what I can do. And I think that will, kind of unify the personality and make them, probably not all credit to him, a little bit more consistent, though, because not only will he have been in the system a second year, but same with guys like Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Devon Godchaux, Matt Judon, all the free agents last year will just be established Patriots. And then you'll see the team probably start faster and come together in 2022.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another thing I really like about Mac Jones too. Like he really wants to be here and he wants to play here and he wants to be able to succeed in the Patriot system. And I really like that about him as well. And I think, that middle part of the season when they were on that win streak, they were looking like a really, really good team. I was like, if they can play like this could be a team that can compete with other teams, down the stretch and in the postseason, because they were playing really good football really in all areas at that point. But then, then we started to see the mistakes start to happen again that we saw at the beginning of the season with, the turnovers and just kind of beating themselves in a way and like making these mistakes that were definitely preventable and they just didn't look polished anymore. And so then there started to be concerns again. So it was kind of a roller coaster of a season in that way, I think, but during that stretch, everybody was like, wow, yeah, this is what we need from the Patriots. If they can play like this consistently, then that's a tough team to beat.
Yeah, and I think you add the ability to catch up, which they really didn't have last season. I mean, they would make these pushes but couldn't close either with a defensive stop or get that last touchdown. Then you're really cooking, because I think the rest of football is probably going to take a step forward next year when you look at teams like, obviously the Raiders with Josh McDaniels now and Dave Ziegler there, I think will provide some good stability. The Chargers were this close to make the playoffs. If not for the Raiders, Justin Herbert, another year with Brandon Staley, the head coach there. The Chiefs are the Chiefs. The Ravens are going to be certainly healthier than they were this season. So the Patriots still need to move forward. It's not a matter of them getting better and they're in good shape. But I think just, again, that ability to have a plan B on offense. When we can't run the ball, we can't be under center, what do we do next? And the good news for them is that Mac Jones was honestly more efficient in the gun with three receivers. The problem then is if you're facing a good secondary like Buffalo, they just go, we're going to play man coverage. And that's a problem the Patriots have not gotten around really since 2018 when they won their last Super Bowl, because Brady was in the same situation in 19. Julian Edelman was a shell of himself. Nikhil Harry was out there. Jacoby Myers was a rookie, and they just couldn't beat teams. So that's why I think that receiver that we talked about not only elevates the rest of the offense, but it gives them an option, an ability to come back, which they're going to need next season when the rest of football is better. And obviously, we saw what happens when you don't have that ability this year.
Yeah, and the AFC overall is tough. I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit too, but you look at some of these other teams, and even this year, the AFC was pretty close in terms of going down the stretch. It was hard to just identify a team that was blatantly the best team in the AFC. I think there's just a lot of competitive teams, and they're only going to get better, and that's why they need to keep up with that and be able to adapt and make the changes they need to make, because the AFC overall is just very, very tough right now. And, even I know the Titans, I mean, they kind of underperformed in their playoff game too. I mean, I still can't believe they sacked Joe Burrow 9 times and managed to lose the game still. But again, like they've, they're a talented team as well. I just don't know that Ryan Tannehill is the quarterback for them really. But I think, they're a good team. I think the Colts couldn't get it done when they needed to, but I still think they're talented. I think obviously the Chiefs and the Chargers, the Raiders, like you said, that division in general. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Broncos. I think they're going to be a team to watch this year, especially if Aaron Rodgers goes there. Who knows where he's going to go? But I think that's a possibility, is him going to Denver. So that they're going to be an interesting team to watch this year as well. And then obviously, the Bills are going to be up there too. So there's a lot of good teams in the AFC right now. And so, that's why that's what kind of makes it exciting, because going into next season, I'm looking at it and it's like, yeah, the Bengals went on such a special run this year that nobody really expected to happen, like all the way to the Super Bowl. And they're gonna be talented. That young core that they have, I mean, they're gonna be fun to watch for a while too. So I mean, there's a lot of good teams, and I think that's something to keep in mind, because I think it's gonna be just as competitive next year in the AFC.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you going through all those teams, and I did the same thing. The Bengals were among the last ones, and they're playing the freaking Super Bowl. So, it has been a special run for them. And I think, part of that, again, is playing in one of the weaker fields we've seen from the AFC. in a long time. And that's, again, credit to them for winning. The Chiefs couldn't do it. The Titans couldn't do it. The Bills couldn't do it. But all of their wins were by one score. So it's just a matter of, you can get in there. The Patriots just need, as the Bengals showed, an ability to come back and to level up. So whatever that involves this offseason, we've talked about it a little bit, just to give yourself a chance, because I think as much as the Patriots, got into the playoffs and the way they limped into it, though, no one has expected them to really make a run of the AFC Championship game. So, but once you're in there, if you, again, can come back and hold on and get that better quarterback play, you can make a run like the Bengals did with these one-score victories and find yourself in the Super Bowl. It's just going to be harder to navigate next year, as we said, for all the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean that's and that was with the Bengals, even like that game against the Chiefs, they were impressive in the second half. And obviously Patrick Mahomes like did not look great in the second half of that game, but that's what it goes to your point, though, that you can, if you have good quarterback play from Joe Burrow, and you have the weapons that he has, and you're able to kind of stay calm and collected and facilitate a comeback like that. That to me like is a team that that's how you make it there. And Joe Burrow, I mean, he was impressive. He's been impressive the whole playoffs. And I think a lot of people, I mean, myself included, kind of counted them out early on in the playoffs just because of lack of experience was one of the biggest things that I said about them. I mean, and then, they that game they had against the Raiders, that was a really good game. That came down to the wire. Then they go into Tennessee and they upset the Titans, which I don't think anybody expected in the first place either. And then I definitely did not think they were going to go to Arrowhead and win, because it's hard for teams to win in KC as it is. And the Chiefs have the experience, and they've been here before. They've done all this before. And so I definitely thought that the Bengals weren't going to win that game simply for lack of experience. And I think a lot of people kind of were in that boat, but it just goes to show you that, if you're playing good football at that time, any team can really make it, as long as that's what I like about playoff football is, just like the mentality of any team can show up on any Sunday and win. Like if you just play better football that day, if you're just showing up at the right time in the postseason, like you can be that team that goes to the Super Bowl. And the Bengals just always find a way to get it done when they need to get it done. And that's the thing about them. And obviously their offensive line is a concern that needs to be addressed for them this offseason. But I think overall, they're getting it done when they need to get it done. And that's how they found themselves where they are. And I think they have a good shot. I think they have a good shot of winning this weekend.
Yeah, I think they do too. And if they don't, I think it will be that offensive line's fault, not only just because you give up 9 sacks to the Titans, but, Jeffrey Simmons is a really good player. He's not Aaron Donald. And that's the biggest thing for me. But, the Rams, as much as they're a better team, I think everyone would agree, than the Bengals, they had a similar run because they're also a number 4 seed and we're in the NFC. So a lot of people, there's a reason they had to go to Tampa Bay and win that game. And yeah, they got the 49ers at home, but the Packers were, the number 1 seed and didn't really play a bad game all season after their season opening loss against the Saints. So, it's a matter of timing, like you said, and I think just having the right pieces in place. But yeah, I mean, the Bengals, from the regular season data we had available by record or point differential or DVOA or pick your statistic, they were just, a good team, not a great one. But as you said, it's a matter of also great timing and performance under pressure. And so they were slowly building to playing their best football because they also beat the Chiefs, albeit at home, week 16 or 17. So that spoke volumes about at least their ceiling is high. And I think at some point for the Patriots, you never just saw that ceiling is really high, or the last time you did was like late November. So that's why you want to hit that and kind of peak a little bit later in the year and then get rolling into the playoffs, which obviously is how the Bengals got to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this Super Bowl for me is I would be fine with whoever wins either way, because the Bengals, obviously their story is really cool and how they got there. And I'd be really happy for Bengals fans if they win too. But with the Rams, it's just like, I mean, how would somebody not be happy for Stafford if he wins with everything that he's been through, being in Detroit and then just getting injured because he wasn't protected there, and then finally coming to a good team with good weapons around him that he can work with. And I think people knew that he had this ability. It was just a matter of being in the right system with the ability to be able to have success there, because like he was set up for it. Like, you know what I mean? Like he was brought into a team that they already had the weapons around him to set him up for success. And now like, look what he's doing now. And that's the whole thing about him is, I'd be really happy for him if he wins. So it's going to be nice to watch the game without really having much of a rooting interest either way, because I think either situation I'd be fine with.
Yeah, and I think that's a good default, right? It's just what fan base has been probably suffering the most since their last Super Bowl. And that's my personal approach, and I think the Bengals are the answer. But
Yeah,
for the reasons you mentioned, I think anyone could get behind these Rams because Stafford just needed a competent team around him, not only just weapons but a good defense and a coaching staff you would trust. The Bengals, the Rams check all those boxes. They obviously got there a few years ago, lost to the Patriots, but it's not like this is a team that lucked their way there or didn't make the appropriate risks bringing in OBJ, not necessarily as a risk like a character guy, but they've traded away a lot of draft picks. So if they don't win this year or next, they're not all in because they've had a lot of homegrown players, but there's not a big margin for error for them moving forward. So, they had a plan, they stuck to it. They also got Von Miller. This is the reason why. So I think you should be rewarded in sports for taking that risk, because what are we doing this all for, if not for winning a championship, permanently placing yourself in history? So whether you're the Bengals get to do that and, Cincinnati gets to celebrate like it's never celebrated before, or the Rams get rewarded, it's a weird Super Bowl matchup, the weirdest of my lifetime. But I think the outcome, however it goes, is going to be a good story.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny you say that about Cincinnati, though, because I'm so excited to see those celebrations, those videos of them celebrating if they win, because that city is going to be nuts that night if they win the Super Bowl. I mean, I know they already canceled like schools the next day over there because of them just being in the Super Bowl. Because either way, if they win or lose, I think that city's going to be going insane.
Yeah, as long as they don't reach Philly in February 2018 after they beat the Patriots, where everything is burning and you've got just like grease up and down the poles so people can slide and climb up them. Like, that's good. Just don't pull a Philly Cincinnati. I think you'll be okay.
That was insane, though. Yeah, I've never seen things get that crazy. I heard Philly fans had it in them, but that you had to actually see it firsthand, really, and see those videos of what people were actually doing to really see what people were talking about when it comes to Eagles fans.
Yeah, it should be fun. But yeah, I think it would, as much as LA is a place you go to party, right? Like the party for the Super Bowl in terms of the whole city is going to be Cincinnati if the Bengals win as opposed to the Rams do.
Yeah, definitely. No, it definitely is, though. I mean, I think it'll be a close game regardless. I think you're right, though. I think the O-line is still the biggest concern for the Bengals. I think they were able to get away with a lot of things when they were able to beat the Chiefs and the Titans. Like, they were able to just get away with a lot of things when it came to that offensive line because they played good enough football in other areas to be able to win. But I don't think there's really any getting away with things when you're playing the Rams and that defense. And I think that that's going to definitely be the biggest thing that might hold the Bengals back is that offensive line in this game, because I mean, this is just a much different game and a much different defense that they're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think the Rams have this kind of weird streak in them where they're, super talented, they're well coached, but they just have a propensity to kind of screw it up sometimes at the wrong time. And you saw that, you've got this 27-point lead or 24-point lead on Tom Brady and the Bucs, and they're hurt, and you can just play pass defense the rest of the game and let Aaron Donald do his thing, let Jalen Ramsey do his thing, and the Bucs come all the way back. And then you're playing the Niners at home, NFC Championship game. And sure, the Niners have kind of had your number in the last 6 meetings, but you just need 20, 24 points to win that game. And, Stafford struggles early. So I think the only avenue in my mind to a Bengals like solid win is if Stafford does something like that, where he just gets off to a rough start. And that's not a knock on him. It's just sometimes quarterback have bad games. But otherwise, I mean, they have a big advantage up front with their offensive line, the Rams do, and their defensive line. And I think if Jalen Ramsey can kind of mitigate Jamar Chase, the Bengals are going to be out of options. But I'm hoping for a close game. And as you know, the Bengals ultimately win. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Matthew Stafford, though, like you said, because I mean, he's been really good, down the stretch. But like you said, he has those moments where he's just, throwing interceptions and he's just starting off slow or something along those lines. And you just kind of see glimpses of people joke like, oh, here's Lions Matthew Stafford in this game right now. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the biggest things to look out for them. And so if that's going to open the door for the Bengals if he starts off slow or he's making mistakes early, because that's going to be a big momentum thing for the Bengals to be able to take advantage of that and kind of get on the board early. And so I think that the early part of the game is going to be really kind of telling of how the game's going to go. But yeah, I'm hoping for a close game too. But it's going to be fun to just see how this goes. Because going into the playoffs, I don't think this is the Super Bowl matchup that anybody would have picked.
No, not at all. It's the first one ever between two number 4 seeds or lower. So that's, I talk about it's a weird matchup, I think, stylistically, but it's, not, it doesn't have to be one of the worst games, but I think it's one of like the matchups between probably two of the worst teams. So you can look at that as a bad thing or just say, hey, look, like one of them is going to win. Like we said, it'll be a good story, great for the fan base or the franchise or whatever it comes out to be. Because that's kind of how the season went, right? The Patriots had their time in the sun as the number 1 seed, and then it was the Chiefs. So maybe it's the Bills. Okay, it's back to the Chiefs, or it didn't shake out that way. And then it was the Titans at the end. So maybe this Super Bowl is kind of perfect for the regular season we had.
I think it is too. I think it's really just telling of how this football season went as a whole, like just looking at this Super Bowl matchup and being like, yeah, that makes sense, like with how wild this season was, and I think it's definitely really impressive the runs that these teams had to get there. And I'm excited. I think it's gonna be fun. I think it's gonna be ultimately a good game, and we'll just see, what happens and who comes out on top in this one, because either way there's gonna be a good story involved.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It always is Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah, no, it is for sure. And so I'm really looking forward to it. And I love football. I love playoff football, just the intensity that comes with it, and having to, come out and just play good football that one game, or you're done, and that's like the fun part about it. So I'm excited to see kind of over the next week, like the rest of this week, kind of like the predictions and who comes out with what, and like who people think should win, or think will win. And that's what I like about scrolling through Twitter sometimes, is I just see people's like thoughts on like, oh, like here's who I think is going to win, and like here's why. So that's going to be fun for the rest of this week too. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I definitely I always love Super Bowl Sunday, and I'm glad that we were able to just get a full season of football in this year, and things are kind of back to normal in that aspect. So it should be really fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. But I appreciate you joining me on the show. This was great. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I always appreciate everyone tuning in to the show and showing support. It really means so much to me, and everyone's just constant engagement of the show, and sharing it, and I always really appreciate that. So thanks again, everybody. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and you all enjoy Super Bowl Sunday, and I will talk to you all soon.